Lisbon is undoubtedly one of the most beautiful cities in the entire world, but unfortunately, a lot of people don't end up loving Lisbon, and I think there's a lot of reasons for that. I just spent a full month here, and I think I've identified a lot of those reasons, and I'm here to share with you. So we're going to talk about some of the cultural differences you should be aware of, some common tourist traps and money-saving tips for your trip, as well as where in town you should actually get food to avoid those tourist traps, where you should base yourself, some day trip best practices, and I'm going to talk about the biggest mistake that I made when spending time here in Lisbon. So we got a lot to cover, but the first thing is don't be scared off by the grittiness. I'm not gonna lie to you, there's gonna be a lot of graffiti, and in general, this is not one of those clean cities. In fact, it might be the dirtiest city I've ever been to in all of Europe, but it's just kind of part of the charm and the culture here. You've got nothing to be worried about. Just learn to embrace it. Check out the graffiti and the street art because it is everywhere, and that kind of leads into the second tip, which it very much feels like culturally, this is an artist city. There are definitely cities around the world that are focused on the business culture, but this, it's just not one of them. It really seems to focus on the artist culture, and that's a beautiful thing to see. The art scene is thriving, whether it be that street art, street performers, the museums. I mean, there's just gonna be art and beauty everywhere you turn, so really learn to embrace it because it is magical. You just have to allow it to be and be open to seeing it. Next tip, which really shouldn't have to be said, but make sure you recognize that culturally, Portugal has a bunch of different cultures within, and Lisbon has a very unique one, but is not representative of all of Portugal. So a perfect example of this is a lot of tourists coming in town and they're like, show me the port wine, I'm ready to drink. And while yes, the port wine is spectacular, that is actually more of a northern culture thing up in Porto. Down in Lisbon, it's actually ginja, which is actually the main drink here, which is kind of like this cherry liqueur thing. It's really spectacular in its own way. So it's not saying that you shouldn't drink port wine, it's not saying that you shouldn't expect those, but just be aware of those cultural differences. Speaking about those cultural differences, definitely recognize the pain point that some of the locals in Lisbon have felt over the last few years and are still feeling. If you've ever heard of the Golden Visa program, you'll know that it caused a huge influx of people immigrating into Portugal because life was good and it was really cheap if you're coming from America or the UK or other parts of Europe. But for many locals, that meant that prices on everything rose really, really quick, but their wages didn't, which meant a lot of people were pushed out of the city center, and it's just changed culturally, and that really is a pain point for locals. So be aware of that. And the next tip is, this really seems to be a stroll city. The magic here is get lost in the streets, take in the charm, and just wander. You don't always need to have something on the agenda here. It really is spectacular to just wander through and appreciate. But like we just talked about with the pain points for the locals, that wandering through the neighborhoods and city can be an issue if you're one of those disrespectful tourists that are drinking, being loud and obnoxious, throwing garbage everywhere. Just don't be one of those people. Recognize that pain point, and when you're doing that wandering, which you absolutely should do, just be respectful. Treat this city just like you would hope that any tourist would treat your own home city. Next tip is Lisbon has a wonderful food scene, but you are gonna need reservations for dinner, so make sure that you book reservations in advance. Also note that dinner happens a little bit later here, somewhere between 7 and 10 p.m., but realistically between 8 and 10 p.m. So 2 extra tips within that. One, if you see a place that is open between the hours of 4 and 7 p.m., you know that they're probably catering to the tourists and it's not gonna be the real deal. But also, even if you don't have that reservation, we had some success showing up right around 7 and when those places opened, because most locals aren't gonna show up until about 8, between maybe 9 p.m. That's when they're gonna really start filing in. So even if you don't have that reservation, give it a shot early. They might be able to squeeze you in. Now, a mistake that a lot of tourists make, especially the American tourists, is that when you do sit down for dinner, they are likely going to bring you olives and bread and cheese, a bunch of that fun stuff that in America is just free at the beginning. Well, here in Portugal, that stuff is not free. Anything that you touch, you are going to pay for. Now, you don't have to have it. If you don't want it, just tell the waiter or waitress, no thank you, please take this away, and you won't be charged for it. Also, make sure to check your bill at the end of the night to make sure that you aren't being charged for things that you didn't eat. And tipping culture here, tipping is not required, but it is definitely appreciated. Typically around 10% is the appropriate amount. So if you're gonna do that, cash is definitely preferred by most of the locals. So if you have cash, be prepared with that. But even if you don't have cash, don't worry. You can still use your card to make a tip. They're just gonna bring the card reader out to you and you say, hey, if this bill is €50, can you make it 55? $1.85, please. You're gonna have to ask them to do that because they won't expect you to be doing that automatically. So be prepared for that. Speaking of cash, while most places will accept some form of credit card or debit card, not everywhere does, and it's typically the local places that will still be cash only. So just make sure that before you enter a restaurant, you ask, do you accept card? That way you can run to an ATM if it's cash only. This next tip was a mistake that I made. So if you're coming in the winter months, don't expect this to be all warm sunshine in that tropical environment. No, definitely pack some warm clothes and make sure to ask wherever you're staying, that hotel, Airbnb, whatever it is, ask them if they have a dehumidifier and a heater, because a lot of places don't have heaters and the humidity is real, and in the winter, man, it just makes it freezing. I've basically been in long sleeves and jackets the entire month, and so are most of the locals, so definitely be prepared for that and don't make that mistake. Speaking of packing, even if you're coming during the summer when you think you might be in flip-flops the entire time, think again. You definitely need shoes with some real support. The hills here are real. The sidewalks and the streets are uneven. They're made of these tiles and they are beautiful, but they do not provide an easy surface to walk on, so make sure that you have the right shoes. Also, if it is raining or if those tiles are wet, definitely note that those things are slick, and I have seen many people wipe out. I've wiped out a few times myself, and what I found is the white tiles are actually more slippery? Yeah, they're more slippery than the black tiles. I don't know if there's any actual truth to that. It might just be my shoes, but if you have the opportunity, try to step on the black tiles, not the white ones. Locals, let me know if I'm completely making that up. Another thing that you should be on the lookout for, I know it's kind of weird, but definitely watch out for dog poop. There's more dog poop in this city than any other city I've ever been to. I don't know why, but yeah, just be on the lookout for that. Not fun. Now, a quick money-saving tip that I see a lot of tourists making a mistake with is don't use Uber. While Uber is perfectly safe and it will work here, Bolt is actually the local rideshare app. It is far more convenient. There's gonna be more drivers. It's gonna be like 20 to 30% cheaper. So if you're wanting to save $1, definitely use Bolt. Now, this next tip is something that tourists really make a mistake on. So if you've been doing your research, you've likely come across Tram 28 telling you to, yeah, you gotta hop on this tram and go see all the views in the Alfama district, right? And it's spectacular. It is really beautiful. I'm not saying don't do it. What I am warning you about is, one, it is really touristy. It's a lot of tourists riding that thing. Two, the lines get really long really quick. So if you're trying to beat the crowds, get out as early in the morning as possible so you're not sitting there waiting. But one of the biggest mistakes tourists make with this is they see a Tram 28 stop, they flag it down, they hop on, and they're like, great, I'm just gonna take this thing for a loop. I'm gonna ride it all the way around. Well, guess what? It does not loop. It goes from one end to the other. So a lot of people end up getting on at one point, paying their €3, and not realizing, oh my gosh, this thing only goes another 2 stops, and then everybody gets kicked off. So make sure you look at actually where you're getting on so you get the most bang for your buck. One other tip about Tram 28 is, if you are somebody who has the capability to walk and you can do hills just fine, maybe skip Tram 28. And I'm not saying it's not great, but locals also have to use the tram. And I imagine for them, it is just a pain in the butt seeing these things constantly swarmed by tourists. Tourists are taking the seat because they want to sit there and film out the windows. And it's just like, come on guys, locals have to use this too. So if you can, maybe just walk it, because you're gonna get the same views by just walking through the district. It's where I've stayed all month and it is beautiful, and I promise you, you can do it on foot. Now, another place that you're probably gonna wanna go check out as a tourist is the castle. And it is beautiful and it provides stunning scenery. That's really what you're paying for, are the views. There's not an interior of the castle that you're gonna see. But the tip here is make sure to just book your tickets online. The line gets really, really long, and that's just to buy tickets, but it's the same price if you just do it on your phone. So save yourself some time and just buy the tickets online. And another money-saving tip is, if you are tight on that cash, again, the castle is really just gonna be providing you views. And while they are spectacular, there are so many other places to get the views for free in Lisbon. Some of those coming up in some of the places that I'll tell you about in just a bit, but you look out for something called a miradouro. That just means vantage point, viewpoint. They're all over the city and they're completely free. So keep that in mind if you're wanting to save some money and want to avoid all the tourists at the castle. Now, I'll tell you about some of my favorite places and tell you where you should stay and talk about my biggest mistake in just a minute, but let's talk about day tripping. So there's two of the most popular day trips from Lisbon are going to be Cascais and Sintra. Sintra is a UNESCO World heritage site, and it is stunning. The scenery there is absolutely spectacular. You could spend a full week over there. And Cascais is this wonderful seaside town. It's a little bit bougie, it's very nice, but also just stunning scenery. But couple of tips when going to each of those. I think a lot of tourists make the mistake of being like, yeah, I'm gonna hit both of these in one day. And while technically you can, I'm gonna say you shouldn't. Both of these destinations deserve at least a full day at a bare minimum. And honestly, if you try to squeeze both into one day, one, you're gonna be rushed, and two, there's not an easy way to get from one to the other. You're gonna have to Uber, take a taxi, it's gonna be costly and just not that efficient. So definitely split them up if you can. Now, it's really important to know that for these day trips or any other destinations outside of Lisbon, there are a lot of different train stations, so make sure you Google and know exactly which train station you're heading out of, because chances are a few of them you're going to need to actually Uber or Bolt out to those destinations because they're not really going to be walkable. And if you are going to have to take that Bolt out there, make sure to dedicate some time for catching that Bolt. We actually missed one of our trains because the Bolt just couldn't get to us in time, and the traffic in the city can be really, really bad depending on the time of day. So just make sure you're doing that preparation in advance. But a couple really important things to know whether you're going to Sintra or Cascais. So either way, you're going to be taking more of like the metro train, which you don't buy tickets in advance. You're going to buy this thing right once you get to the train station. So at least plan 5 minutes ahead of time getting to the train station so you can get one of these things. Also note that you should hang on to this. You're gonna need it to scan into the terminal to be able to get on the train. Somebody will check this thing on the train, and you will have to scan this on your way out once you arrive. So make sure to keep that thing handy. Also important to note that for a day trip to either of these places, the trains are pretty much gonna be running all day, but they run at different intervals, and some are express trains and some are slower. They cost the same, but just make sure you know which one you're getting on, because it can add or reduce your trip by about 15 minutes each way. So just check those timetables so you're getting on that quicker one. No reason to waste time on the train. Speaking of the train itself, if you're going to Cascais, I highly recommend sitting on the left side of the train. You're going to be riding along the sea the whole way, and the left side of the train is going to give you those perfect views. Also, once you get to Cascais, you're definitely going to want to check out the historical town, but do yourself a favor and walk about 15-20 minutes outside of town to something called Boca de Inferno. It is a beautiful spot right on the water where Mother Nature, it just puts on a show. There are going to be a lot of tourists, but it is well worth going over there. It's completely free, and yeah, you'll be amazed for sure. Now let's talk about Sintra. One of the common mistakes I see tourists make is they get on the train and all of a sudden they arrive at Portela de Sintra and they get off there. That is not the correct place to get off. You're going to be fine if you do get off at that station, but that is not where you're actually going to be able to access the castle and everything else. You want to wait all the way until the last stop that is just called Sintra. That's where everybody will get off. The train stop actually ends there, so wait the entire time. Don't get off on that wrong stop. But another mistake that I see a lot of tourists make is right once they get off that train, you're going to be overwhelmed with a lot of people saying, hey, we'll take you up to the castle. Here's a tuk-tuk ride. Here's a golf cart ride. And they hop on those. And while you can definitely do that, and you should do that if you're somebody who can't handle hills well, there's definitely a better option. And in my opinion, that is just taking one of the most beautiful little hikes I have ever been on. It is spectacular scenery. It takes about 40-45 minutes to get up to the castle. And to be honest, it was our best experience in Sintra. We enjoyed that more than the castle itself. So if you're able to, I definitely would not pass up that hike, and definitely get there early in the morning to do that so you have the trail to yourself. Also note that when you actually get up to the castle, you're going to see people queuing up and buying their tickets. And the ticket machines, they kind of fool you into buying a full price ticket that includes not just the exterior of the castle, but the interior as well. But a lot of tourists, they don't want to see the interior, and I was in that camp. But unfortunately, I got fooled and I bought the ticket, so I did end up going inside, and I'd say it was cool. It was definitely something that you should see if you want to. But if you're somebody like me who doesn't really care to see the inside, a couple tips. One, don't be afraid to ask for help if you are buying your tickets up there. That way you don't get fooled into buying that full price ticket that includes the interior. Second is if you're really looking to save some money, you can actually save 15% by just buying them online. It does have to be 3 days in advance, but I'd highly recommend that. One, so you save the money, but two, because you're gonna get first dibs at actually picking the entrance times. All of the tickets are timed entrances and they do fill up rather quick, especially during the summer months. So definitely do yourself a favor and book online. That's what I'll be doing the next time. Now I'll tell you about that biggest mistake that I made and tell you where you should stay in town in just a second. But first, I want to tell you some of the best places in town to get food. So if you're looking online, you're going to see a lot of people recommend the Time Out Market. And it's definitely something that you can go and check out, but to be honest, the best food isn't there. But what you definitely should check out around that is in the same building, there's a local fresh market that's open every single morning. That's where you'll get more of a local experience. I definitely check that out. Now, I definitely recommend a place called Fora. It's up in the Alfama district. It is a spectacular place, great pastries, great coffee, wonderful staff, and you'll see the trams going by. It's a really fun local experience. Another of my go-tos was a place called Kamoba. It also has coffee. There's gonna be a lot of people working there, and that's because they've got some of the fastest Wi-Fi in town. Some really good healthy meals, also have pastries. The prices are a little bit higher, but it's a pretty fun experience. Another can't miss spot is a cafe called Café de Gargem. This is the cafe with the views. It is spectacular. There's often a line out the door, so you might have to wait, but don't worry, the views are spectacular. Really good product as well. Highly recommend them. If you want to try some traditional Portuguese street food, you've got to check out a place called Bafanas of Alfonso. They serve bafanas, which is a little sandwich with really thinly sliced pork. They are spectacular. Only a couple bucks, and it is a cash only place. Highly recommend, and make sure to put on the sweet mustard and the chili oil. It's spectacular. And of course, no trip to Lisbon is gonna be complete without some great seafood. There's a spot called Ultime Porto, which is definitely outside of town. You're gonna wanna take a boat there. It's on the docks. Everything is gonna be caught fresh, local that day. You're gonna get some great fish there. Highly recommend them. But let's talk about areas of town before I jump into that top mistake I made. So if you're looking for that old world charm and you're really wanting to get the views, the Alfama district, that neighborhood is just spectacular. That's where we've been all month, and it is super charming. Now, I do want to warn you, it is not the best if you can't handle hills. This is the part of town that survived the big earthquake back in the 1700s, and the infrastructure is really, really old. Old buildings, not a lot of accessible roads, uneven surfaces, and lots of hills. But you're gonna get a lot of charm. Now I see a lot of tourists staying in two areas, Baixa and Chiado. To me, Baixa, it's a total tourist trap. It's the place that I wouldn't recommend for anybody. Yes, it is central, and yes, it is flat. You're not gonna deal with too many hills, but to be honest, everything around there is a tourist trap. I wouldn't try staying there. Chiado is a little bit different. There are gonna be a few hills. You're still really central to everything. It's got a little bit more local charm, but there are definitely gonna be some tourist traps in there as well. It's probably not for me, but if you're just wanting convenience, Chiado would be a wonderful spot for you. Another neighborhood that people really like is Barrio Alto. Now, I'd really recommend that for two groups of people. People who like to party and people who are young at heart and are cool with the party atmosphere. A lot of people are gonna be partying on the streets late at night too, so it's gonna be pretty loud. I wouldn't recommend it for families. Another area that is close by to there is Calles de Sodre. That's just below Barrio Alto. Now, it also has a bit of a party scene, definitely that young demographic as well, but it's hugged right up against the river. You get really good access to everything else, and you don't have to tackle too many hills unless you're going straight up to Barrio Alto or Principal Real. So I really liked that area. I found myself hanging out there quite a bit. And the other place is Principe Real, which is all the way at the top of the hill. You're gonna have a more affluent community up there. Definitely some rich folks, really chic, boho. I don't know. It's a really nice place, definitely worth checking out. If you've got the money and you want to say, hey, I want to start at the top of the hill each day and work my way down, and then maybe I'll take a bolt back up, might be a great spot for you, but probably not where I'd be looking to stay my next time. Now, if you want to know where I'm going to base myself the next time that I'm visiting, well, that's actually what I was referring to about my biggest mistake. While Lisbon is spectacular, we ended up loving Porto so much more. And if you want to know everything that I wish I knew before visiting Porto, you can watch this video right here. Or if you want an unedited, unfiltered conversation about my experience living in Portugal for a month, you can watch this video right here. I hope this was helpful, and we'll catch you guys next time.